Okay, welcome, Anuradha ji. Um,
Namaste,
you were the
Sanjay.
mystery writer for the who wrote the Lotus in the Stone question. It's so amazing. So many people interacted with it, and we will also have a mystery guest come in about half an hour.
Oh,
One of the people who got it right. So we're going to invite it.
okay.
But welcome to the Garuda show, and congratulations on the pre-launch of your book.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful working with you.
Yes, so amazing. In fact, it was quite a journey getting here, and I also went through a journey. I went through the journey to all these places and temples, not only through editing or looking at the book, but the all the places that you took us. So, without much ado, the book is Lotus in the Stone, and today I have author, travel blogger, entrepreneur, writer, reviewer. She actually is in the Limca Book of Records for having written the most book reviews. So absolutely incredible personality. Pleasure and honor to have her here.
Thank you so much, Sankrant.
Okay, so I'm going to start with this quote, which starts, I am a Hindu by birth, like billion plus other people on earth. Like most people of my generation, 70s and 80s, I was oblivious to this fact during the childhood. And this is kind of so much my experience also, as I was mentioning to you, because
Yes.
um, this is like exactly how um, I was like, we never really thought about, we are Hindu or we are something like that. That was not even how it was. And it's like the culture was just absorbed in us. How do you describe that?
So for me, it was like I grew up in army cantonments.
Uh,
So it is, one diversity is a norm.
yes.
There it's not an exception; it's a norm. And we were a generation which was, I think, quite focused on building our career.
Mm,
Our
mm,
road to happiness was through career. Um, Especially if you're growing up in North India, the culture was a little distant thing.
mm,
Due to multiple reasons. Whether it was because the only respectable subjects to study were science,
right.
because they were your passport to success, or because the culture doesn't really is not like an embroidery which it is in the rest of the country. Especially
Mm,
when you come
mm,
down south, it's like the embroidery lying on the land.
mm,
So you go there and you appreciate it, but in
mm,
north it's kind of it's down, somewhere down there. You have to dig it out. And our parents generation was also like that. They were busy building their careers and running a family at a time when India was just coming out of its colonial era. So I guess the culture somewhere stayed in the background, and a
mm,
lot of
mm,
disconnected from it. And
mm,
we would feel it because we didn't know it. We
right.
we realized it once we started exploring the culture. Once I started exploring the culture, and once I started meeting it at various point in time, then I realized now today when I go back to my own home state or home region, which is North India, I now discover so many things which were right there when I didn't see. And I'll give you an
Mm.
example. I grew up in Chandigarh primarily, uh, which is also your city, I
Yes,
guess.
that's true. Yeah.
So I lived in a place called Panchkula,
Huh.
and it's very close to Pinjore Gardens, very
Yes, yes,
close.
yes.
Now I've gone to Pinjore Garden like million times. Every
Huh.
family, school picnic, college picnic, everything went to Pinjore Garden. But
Right.
I did not know that the walls of Pinjore Garden are made with the rubble of a ancient Bhima Devi temple, which is
Oh.
right outside the walls, right
Oh.
outside.
Oh.
And my last trip before the lockdown, and I went and I spent like 4 hours there trying to study every sculpture, and it's one of the oldest remains of stone temples in that region. I mean, growing up there, we didn't even think there were stone
Yeah,
temples
I
there.
didn't even know this till now. So in fact, that's what I find in your books. There's so many gems that are, there are things that are already it's kind of you manage to bring to our awareness and consciousness all of these things that are there in front of us but are hidden because we haven't looked.
Don't see. Yeah, because we don't have that drishti to see.
Yes, yes, that gaze, and that's what I find the most amazing is that
Yeah, as everything, but it was right there. It's right at the gate, and we didn't see it. And today I could spend about 4 hours there.
yeah. So I mean that's one of the things, in your book it's kind of bringing, as I said, into our consciousness things that are there, and all these invisible strands that you talk about, which I found very interesting. But one of the experiences is this about getting lost in the Kumbh Mela. There's kind of what popular culture has been depicting, and then what your experience turns out to be, and ends up being quite different from what the popular culture actually comes up with.
Yes.
So speak a little bit about that.
So Kumbh Mela actually was a culmination of my lot of my experiences, and in
Mm,
fact, probably the reason this book came into existence, because I was discovering things very randomly,
mm,
and I was not able to connect them. And Kumbh Mela is when all of this came together, and it was like it was like threads getting into the Waffen Weft eventually.
yes.
And Kumbh Mela to me is that, that typical utopian state that we talk about, and we think
Right.
it's not possible. I mean, we all talk about it, but we all consciously think that, subconsciously think that it's not possible to have it.
Mm, mm,
My experience is that Kumbh Mela is the closest we get to utopia. It's
mm,
where everybody behaves themselves.
mm.
Anybody who steps into those grounds start behaving themselves.
Right.
So, and that's an experience which is very difficult to believe unless you've stood there and experienced it. I mean,
Right.
if you can tell me that this is so, I would say, okay, maybe, but I will not believe it.
Right.
So
Right.
these things to experience, feel, and I've written elaborately about Kumbh Mela in various chapters. So that's an experience. In fact, this is now one of my top experiences that I recommend in India if you want to and spend some time. Don't go there as a tourist. Go and spend some time there.
So what was really special about it though? Like, is it a I mean, your book touches on it. What is it possible to convey? What is the special feeling?
So the special thing about Kumbh Mela is the fact that we all behave as we should.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know we all know that we should be polite to each other. We all know that we should not steal. We all know that we should trust each other. We all know that we should help each other. We it's a best behavior or best
Hmm.
foot forward, but
Hmm. Hmm.
if somebody willing to do that without any watchdog telling you to do that, it's something that is inherent in the air, and it happens.
So that's the really incredible thing, because I think the depiction is about chaos, but the reality is about this sort of subtle organization that's holding everything together, even without the state or anything else really doing much in managing it. So
Well, I mean, they do manage. They do the
yes,
organization. I would not find their role in organizing something of this scale. But then people simply behave themselves, which is
uh,
amazing.
uh,
I mean, there are crowds, but like I said, I put it in the book as well that you can move around and there are a million people around and nobody touches you even by mistake.
yes. So this is a funny quote. I actually kind of related to it also, because I growing up in Chandigarh, a lot of people, whenever they talk to me, they'd say, "Oh, you must be South Indian because because I'm darker." And there's this stereotype of people from the South being darker. So I can totally relate to this, but I found this very interesting and very relevant also. Getting called Kali and your dadi telling you something. Tell me a little about that.
So, I mean, you know how it is to grow up as a dark-skinned girl
Yes, yes.
in Punjab
Right,
specifically.
right, right.
Uh, but having said that, one sentence saying that Krishna also is Kala.
Huh.
One sentence that Draupadi also is Kali and we worship them. So, you know, what's
Right.
wrong?
Right.
You
Suddenly
know,
the whole
that kind
context
of.
changes.
Yeah, but on a lighter note, I would say even today, most people, if I tell people guess where I am from, they take every state. You know, I merge in almost any state except Punjab,
Yeah, yeah,
which is
for
my
me too. For
birthplace.
me too. It's like exactly the same thing. Like nobody's like, oh, then like, oh,
Yeah, so, but
you're from Punjab, you're from
there
Chandigarh.
I speak the language. You know, so I speak Punjabi, I read, write, speak Punjabi. So that's how I merge. So you find your ways to merge.
Yes, yes, yes. In fact, this is one of the
And for
things
a
that I,
traveler, sorry, for traveler, merging is a need. You know, unless you merge, people don't open up. You remain an outsider. So if you really
you have
want
to
people
share. You have to
to,
share this secret because what I found was, and I learned so much from reading your book. I don't know if I still have a some great relationship to temples myself. I've not been much of a temple goer, and when I was reading your book, it was like you were giving me a gaze to look at the temples. You were teaching me how to look at the temple almost. And
right.
and I think that was for me very fascinating. And the fact that, this quote that you have, the first reaction to the stone temples was cold, and um the garbhagriha was too hard and too far away, and the priests were rude and rigid. This is kind of a lot of our experiences. So how did that shift happen? I think you were just talking about how do you immerse and how do you not become just a tourist, and how do you actually, what is that journey?
Right. Yeah, so I have actually spoken about three or four defining moments in my journey. Right in the first chapter, there
Right,
are three or four defining moments that I have defined. So I'll not touch upon that. I'll let the readers read that.
right.
But yeah, my journey has been from an absolute casual traveler, leisure traveler, where you travel to take break from your corporate career, from your busy
Sure,
life,
sure.
to somebody who's interested in architecture, because
Right,
that is what gets written about. So
right.
all the scholarly literature available about our temples and monuments and heritage in general is about the architecture,
Mm,
is
mm,
about the architecture, is about the period, is about the style.
mm,
So the second step was to go there. But once you've seen a lot of that, you realize that the dimensions and the data that you've been talking about is not relevant.
mm.
What is relevant is what is the purpose for which it was built. What is the purpose that it served? What is the purpose it is serving even today? None of them have lost their purpose. They are still serving a purpose.
Right.
Even if I look at it from a pure entrepreneurial eye and say they are like our gold mines. You can mint them anytime.
Absolutely.
So they're still serving a purpose. It's like the heritage. It's like the inheritance that we received from our ancestors, and we use them. And it's their work, it's their hard work, it's something that they have built, but they pass it on to us to enjoy it or either take it further, destroy it. What we do with it is what we do. So it's a common inheritance. It's not, I don't know how heritage and inheritance linguistically combine, but it's our inheritance. And
Mm,
also somewhere the shift happened in terms of them to mine.
mm.
So it was about, so for example, if you're looking at a Chola temple, so it was Cholas built it. Chola was somebody.
Right, right.
So it's not somebody, now he's my ancestor who's built it. So
Ah,
that
ah, ah.
shift is a major shift.
No, I
So
found
instead
that
of
really
somebody
incredible.
built
And
it.
the other part that I saw, was that this quote that I picked up, which is, this is such an incredible experience about going to this place, and suddenly there's a relationship of bhakti, when the driver who's driving you around, or the person, he's like, oh, आप माँ के द्वार जाएंगी, तो
जी,
एक जैसे रिश्ता बदल गया, जो जो रिश्ता था वो
बिल्कुल,
रिश्ता एक एक और ही रिश्ता हो गया. और
बिल्कुल.
this is something that I noted in your book, and also I've noticed sometimes in my own travel also, which is like much less extensive, especially in India, than what you've done. But what I find is that, growing up in this kind of English medium, convent educated, that kind of thing, you actually, like, for me, it took me a while to realize how is India working. How is this Bharat, which is there, like, right in front of our eyes, but how is it working, and how is the relationship to people with all of these things that are around them? It's like a learned thing almost for us, because we've been taken away from
Right. So you realize that when you believe in the same thing, it actually applies to a lot of things. If you believe, so if you are all an Amitabh Bachchan fan, that also kind of connects you somewhere.
it.
If you support the same team in a sport, even that connects you somewhere. But the roots that where the bhakti connects you are far more deeper, and
Yeah,
that trust comes instantly, and
right,
it's not limited to one thing. So what happens is that most of the operational connects that we have, they end with that connect, they
right,
end uh, with that activity, or that vertical of our life.
right.
But the connect that the bhakti gives you is far more deeper. It's not superficial, so
Mm,
you kind of stay connected,
mm.
and you are not really bothered about your outward differences.
Absolutely.
What matters is that you have faith in the common deity, and somehow you start associating with that deity's characteristics.
Right, right. Reminds me of this, Tulsi Das and Ramcharitmanas says, Jaki Priyana Nama Vedehi, so Tajiyo Koti Bairisam, Jaddapi Paramasanehi. So it's the other thing also. The relationship is the relationship through Ram, you know. So the
Yes,
Nata becomes through Ram, the Nata becomes through Devi.
yeah, I wish you had told me earlier. I would have included this in the book.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's one of my
Yeah, so
favorite
yeah,
lines.
this is exactly what I experienced, but it's good in a way that I didn't include, because I am not reading and then experiencing it, but I've experienced it, and then Tulsidas also kind of validates that.
Yes, yes,
In
yes,
fact,
yes.
lot of our scriptures kind of validate what you experience on the road, and no
Right.
wonder our biggest philosophers were our biggest travelers.
Yes, yes. And also there was so much, I mean, of course, starting from Shankaracharya's story himself, which is so incredible, he
Yes,
starts
you
off
take
with,
it with anybody. Shankaracharya, though I feel I don't know. It seems unbelievable. It kind
yes,
of
yes,
seems
yes,
unbelievable to me.
yes.
24 years, and he's touched every corner of the country and the
I
larger
know.
Akhand Bharat. He's touched. But the more contemporary ones, about whom we know a little more, like Guru Nanak Dev, or Mirabai, or all the bhakti poets, they were all continuously traveling. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu,
Right,
all
right.
of them were continuously traveling.
And
Vivekanand,
yeah, before I don't want to go into the language thing, but it's so interesting because, people say, oh, without English, we are not linked or something. But
yeah,
people were, all these people were traveling all over India for millennia, and they were
yeah.
talking, they were eating, they were living somewhere. They didn't have any problems in terms of communication. But I'm going to bring one quote up actually, which is from Kerala, talking about Shankaracharya, and I found this
Mhm.
really interesting because, especially you're traveling with this young journalist, and she's
Yes.
very, you're expecting that she's not going to be interested in temples and is going to be the skeptical
Yeah.
journalist type, and then she surprises you by how much devotion she had for the temples when she actually traveled with you.
Yeah.
So
So, Sankranti, I have mentioned about two or three such incidents in the book to
yes,
convey a point,
yes,
but I have experienced this many, many, many times, especially with younger generation, because we tend to think that they do not relate to dharma, they do
right,
not relate to religion, they do not relate to faith or deities. We think that, and sometimes they also kind of give that impression. They try
right,
to give that
right,
impression,
right.
but when you see beneath their veneer,
Hmm.
they are very much connected, sometimes far more than I am.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of uh, satisfaction that
Right,
they're going to carry this forward.
right,
Now,
right,
how they do it may change from generation to generation, which it should,
right.
but they are going to carry it forward.
Right, right. No, I think that part of hope also, this other quote that you had, this experience of of being, of your neighbor who happened to be Christian and coming, and then when you return the plate to her, you always put something back, and this is such a typical thing to do in Indian
It's
culture. And what I
a
find is that there is
Indian.
part of that connect that there's that cultural connect that actually goes across these communities, and especially if you look at the older communities, where even when somebody is Christian, sort of some of the newer converts or something are different. But if you look at the older communities, there is so much sort of this जैसे कहते हैं ना रम गया है, या वो रस, जो भारत का रस है वो पूरा का पूरा उसमें रमे हुए हैं सब लोग एक तरह से.
बिल्कुल वो एक कंटिन्यूटी है, एक धारा है. उस धारा में जिसको बोलते हैं ना, एक मोड़ शायद आ गया हो, लेकिन धारा तो धारा है, बहेगी.
बिल्कुल.
तो वो एक धारा बह रही है.
Definitely. So, and then this one, I put this other one because it was coming from outside India. So this is a person that you meet in Bali, and so this connect is not only happening when you're traveling in India, but you find this connect is also happening when you're traveling outside India.
Yes, absolutely. Wherever there are ancient cultures, in fact, if I could have my wish after this book, I would want to do similar books on all the ancient civilizations in the world. If I could have my wish, because there is a lot of energy in all the places that have been inhabited for a very long time. And they carry the energy of every era, of every generation that has lived there and added something to the place. Right. And if you you'll find some traces of that here and there. And you also find a lot of ancient connections. Of ancient connections.
Yeah, this relationship to India, this relationship to Bharat, and this is what I noticed in that mention also, where there is, it's like somehow we've been obsessed by this modern India and all of this stuff, but all of the people, when you actually go on travels and on the international level, I've ended up traveling quite a bit. Their connect is to the ancient India. Nobody in some sense, not in the ancient India in the sense that of history, but of the parts that we are considering the ancient. Like this relationship to the Ganga, which is coming in in Bali, for instance.
So I would say I see this as a gap that we have to fill. Right. We have not created anything in the 20th or the 21st century that people can see inherently Indian.
Yes.
What we are creating today is a copy paste. So why would somebody look at a copy pasted thing when they can see the original?
Right.
So we have not, at least in last 100 years, we've not really created something which is essentially Indian and essentially original, innovation, creativity, nothing. So the moment we do it, people connect to today's India as well.
Absolutely.
They do. I remember during my IT days, very early IT days, I think I was passing through I had a layover at one of the European airports, and I was talking to somebody, and that person said, "Oh, you are from IT, can you prepare my laptop? It's got stuck."
Yes.
So we do have a thing there.
Right.
Irrespective of what you do, but we've not really created something.
Right.
So if you see what known for from the past and what other civilizations or the current civilizations which are known for or which are appreciated are the ones who have created something.
Right. And in fact, it's very interesting. Even today, India's biggest cultural export is actually yoga. If you look at it, India's the one which is creating the most influence in the world today is not what came out of this modern era, but the one that has these very ancient roots. And now I see Ayurveda, all of these things. Yes.
You have to see, we've created that, whether it's yoga, whether it's tantra. Tantra is very popular outside.
Yes,
in fact, it's
very much
hard to find tantra practitioners in India, but it's very popular outside India.
Right.
So we've not created, we have to create something.
Right. Absolutely. So I'm going to this one was very interesting for me because of this, how these stories link us across the across the entire mass of Bharat. And this is something that I've been struck with so long ago. A long time ago, I'd written this essay called "Why India is a Nation," because it just kind of had hit me how this Ramayana and Mahabharata and all this, and you touch upon this, the story of Shakti, and how the pieces of Shakti fall all over the landmass. And if we didn't have a
Right.
conception of Bharat, why would it only fall on the landmass of Bharat? Why not just in one state, or why not just
Right.
why not in all of Asia or something like that, or all of some parts in Europe? So there's this conception of Bharat is there, and one of the ways the story is linked. You talk about this temple, which again, like so many things. I kept reading your book, and there's so many things that I simply didn't know, because a lot of times I read books and I would know a lot about. I was like, yeah, okay, fine, it's interesting. But when I was reading your book, you just like uncovered all these layers. Like there's this temple in Tamil Nadu, is that right? Where there's a Pandava temple where, I mean, they're
Yes.
celebrating the moment where
Right.
Krishna has visited Hastinapur, and this is somewhere in Tamil Nadu.
Yes. Yes. So, I see, especially after writing this book, I realized that India is actually wrapped in its stories.
Hmm.
It's the stories which bind us, whether it's the Ramayana, whether it's Mahabharata, or whether other Puranic stories. The stories are actually connecting places. And,
Hmm.
every story that we have in our scriptures is written in a certain time and place. And it's
Hmm.
always mentioned,
Hmm.
where it is taking place and
Right.
at what time it is taking place.
Right.
So it is very, very, they are very, very rooted in a place and a time.
Hmm.
And when you travel with those stories, you literally cover whole of India. You
Hmm.
literally cover whole of India. And what is more interesting, which is something that I've not touched in this book, maybe some other book some other time, is that a lot of our yatras, they actually follow a very cosmic movement, whether
Hmm.
it's within our body or whether it's in the universe. So they follow that cosmic, they replicate that cosmic movement. So
Right.
if how evolved would have our knowledge been to be able to not just understand it but also recreate it and replicate it.
Right. Right. So what I find was that this connection of story, it is in a time and a place, but they also seem timeless. Like, this is what I've been struck with. Like Ramayana happened maybe 5,000, 6,000, who knows, the when it happened. But people are talking like it happened yesterday. Like, oh, Sita was here, this is her rasoi, this is where
Yes.
Ram stopped. It's like, what other civilization has a relationship with a story which is physically rooted, and they're saying, oh, this happened, and you can literally trace on the entire map. And I think you've also included a map where you've traced all these spots, and even today
Right.
people have that story that is connecting it. It's just incredible. Like,
Absolutely. And it's also that everybody wants to own their own piece of story.
right,
So
right.
if Ram was in if Sita was captured in Panchavati, then Panchavati wants to own that part of the story. Or
Absolutely.
if Ram Janaki Vivah happened in Janakpur, which is now in Nepal, so they own that part of the story.
Right, right.
So we own the story, but at the same time we also multiply them. you
Hmm,
know
hmm,
so
hmm.
wherever the story may not have traveled as per our known scriptures, because I
Sure,
always say that what we know is probably a very small part of what existed. We've lost
sure,
a lot of
sure.
our literature, we've lost a lot of our stories. So it's possible that something which exists in some kind of a folklore had a reference which we have lost.
Right, right,
So,
right.
and that's where I get the liberty, because when I see scholars talking, they are so bound by the scriptures that they can't step out of its boundaries.
Hmm.
But a
Because
traveler like you can step out, can step into scripture, step out of scriptures, step into experiences, step out of experiences. So everybody owns those stories, and
because it's coming
that
also
is the most
from the
fascinating part.
lived experience, from your lived experience, and your going to the places. But the other part is just like how this geography and the stories are just like they're like dotted across the landscape of India, and everybody has created their own relationship with the story, and it's a very real
Absolutely.
relationship, you know. And
It's a very real relationship. It's very real relationship, and and it maps very well to the story.
right,
That is the most interesting part. So, for example, people, I talk about Krishna's story, and I say that people in Braj are not really worried about what Krishna did after he left Braj.
right,
For them, he lived here, and
right,
those years that he spent in Braj are the most important years.
right, right,
Yes, there is a story. Yes, there is everybody now. At least everybody knows what happened after he left Gokul and then he left Mathura. But what is relevant to them is that he played here as a kid, as a
right,
child,
right, and
and all the events that happened with him while he was in the Braj.
right,
So
right,
they're so rooted in the place where they supposedly happened that uh, and they continue to live that way, which
right.
is the most fascinating part.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Like this timelessness, as if this story is just, you know, it's just happened yesterday. You know, there is this sense of timelessness where there is a relationship that has made that story alive, and it is for people of each of those places. It's like as real as something that literally took place a day ago. And but this is a story from 5,000 years ago. I mean, this to me is like the power of the story, you know, the power of
It is the power of the story, and also I would come back to what I said earlier. It is about how you relate to story. Do you think
Hmm.
it is somebody else? Krishna was somebody else,
Right,
and it is just a story, or
right,
you say Krishna was my ancestor? It's my
yes,
ancestor story. I'm
yes,
still,
yes.
I am his lineage, and he's still living through me.
This is my story, this is part of my story, absolutely.
This is my family story.
Bilkul,
Krishna
bilkul.
is not somebody who is other.
Yes, yes,
वो
yes.
कोई दूसरा नहीं है.
हाँ, हाँ,
मैं
हाँ,
उनका वंशज हूँ,
हाँ,
तो वो मेरे थ्रू अभी जीवित हैं.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल,
या
बिल्कुल,
हम जितने अभी लोग हैं वो
बिल्कुल,
राम के, कृष्ण के, जो भी सूर्यवंश, चंद्रवंश, जैसे भी हम जिस
बिल्कुल,
लीनियज से आते हैं, हम
बिल्कुल,
उनके वंशज हैं.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल,
जब
बिल्कुल,
वो भावना आपके मन में आ जाती है कि मैं वंशज हूँ, तो आपका रिलेशनशिप अपने आप चेंज हो जाता है.
बिल्कुल, बिल्कुल। एक एक
ये
तो
स्टोरी
वंशज
हमको
है,
तब
और
तक
एक
कहते हैं
जैसे
जब ये
कहते हैं ना,
किसी और की है.
एक हृदय का नाता है, एक हृदय का नाता है। ये उससे नहीं आया कि मैंने कहीं पढ़ लिया है या कुछ। एक एक नाता है, उस जगह का नाता है, और एक हृदय का नाता है जो कि बहुत ही अद्भुत है।
I would even go back and I would even go to the extent saying this is genetic. We are carrying it in our DNA.
Yes, 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 yes. So much true. So I'm going to switch to this other thing, which is, uh, the fact that, as I said, you know, I also grew up in Chandigarh, and we kind of knew that there is this Chandi Mandir, but you know, it wasn't like something we even visit. And you mentioned Mangalore is also named after. So
Yeah.
the like Chandigarh is supposed to be so modern, right? But this so-called modernity seems to be just like a very thin veneer
Right.
over this kind of just rootedness of tradition. Even for a new city like Chandigarh, it's like that, and of course Mangalore is also like that.
No, you know what? We think it's very modern and it was designed in a very European way. But, there is a place called Ropar, very close to Chandigarh.
Huh.
Right? And there is an ASI museum there. And if you go and see the excavations that were done in that region, you will find there was an Indus Valley city there, and
Oh,
which actually followed the same grid structure that Chandigarh has followed. So it's
oh wow.
actually carrying the lineage.
So you know, it's
Okay.
like it,
And Chandi Mandir, you won't believe it. I studied in KV Chandi Mandir,
huh, huh,
and
huh.
I had never visited Chandi Mandir. It is in this March that when I was visiting Chandigarh for some event in Punjab University, that I spent a day exploring that Bhima Devi temple and Chandi Mandir.
Right, right, right.
And
Well,
nobody knows. I asked so many people in Chandigarh, even today, they say, हाँ है तो पर कहाँ है पता नहीं.
so I'm going to put up this one quote which is around this the engineering thing, because I think there's some part of us that can't get too far away from being engineers, no matter what we do. So,
Sure.
you mentioned this yantra and how the temples must be built in accordance with the yantra, and the ones that deviate from the yantras, they're nishfal. There's really not they're not really doing what they're supposed to be doing. So so tell us a little bit about the engineering aspects. And your book goes into so much detail, but give us some teaser, like what are was there really some very grand ancient engineering that was going behind these? How does it work?
I don't know if they called it engineering, but tell me how come something like a Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjore or a Kailashnath temple in Ellora or a Kandariya Mahadev temple in Khajuraho, how are they standing? Without it, I mean, they've seen all kinds of things. They've seen neglect, they've seen invasions, they have, they've seen all kinds of weather, everything, but they're still standing. The proportions, the beauty of Indian engineering is that it stays behind, it stays invisible, it doesn't shout and say, look at my engineering.
Right,
It lets the purpose take over, it lets the aesthetics take over, and it stays in the background, but like a very strong reed ki haddi, very strong.
right.
It stays behind. And not many of us look at our spine unless it starts troubling us. So the same way engineering stays very invisible, but the moment you look at them from an engineering lens, that's the biggest thing that you have to admire. In fact, I remember for a lot of years, I used to post one temple picture every morning on Twitter. So initially there was some resistance, and people said, "Oh, do you think this, that, blah, blah?" So I asked them. I just posted a picture of, I think, Tanjore Brihadeshwara temple, and I said, "Listen, this has been standing for at least 1,000 years. We know this. This is everything is available. You can go see, measure, do whatever machines you can use. Can you recreate this?"
Right.
And not a single person said we can recreate it, and we know we can't recreate it with all the technology at our disposal. So I think one of the biggest thing that we have lost in the process is the tools and techniques.
Right.
We're still guessing how did they transport such huge chunks of stone, how did they put them on top of shikharas, how did they do this, how we are lost. I don't know if we have too much information about it, or even if it's there, it must be in some scholarly circles. It's not available in public domain too much. There is a little bit which I have given references to, but that's an aspect which we need to not just explore but integrate with our education system.
Yes. It's a lost art in some ways. So
Yes.
Anuradha, I have a special guest. It's a very good moment. We had a little contest out there, which was trying to guess the book. Who wrote this book, Lotus in the Stone, which is absolutely gorgeous. I'm going to show the cover in a second also, but I'm going to welcome Bhaskar Kamble. Bhaskar, let's see if I can add you here. Welcome to the show.
Namaste, welcome. I'm very happy to see you. Namaste.
Bhaskar, you were.
Thank you for guessing my name. People were guessing so many different names. Thank you for guessing my name. I don't know how you guessed it.
It was just a matter of luck, because long time back I had seen a tweet by Sankrant where he was mentioning that you are an upcoming Garuda author. And then I saw your Twitter profile, and then you have this Instagram page on temples and everything. So it was just a matter of putting 2 and 2 together after that.
Oh, wonderful. I don't even remember. Had I tweeted about Anuradha ji?
No, you had once mentioned about authors and something about authors, and Anuradha ji wrote something about herself, like, what about me, something like that. And then you said Garuda authors don't need to worry, something like that.
Okay. So it must be, you did the good investigation skills, the Sherlock Holmes part. And of course, Bhaskar himself is a Garuda author. He's going to be coming up with this fabulous book on mathematics. And so I was thinking it's a good point to have you, part of the discussion on temple engineering as well. A lot of the mathematics, Bhaskar, when you were studying it, you noticed that some of the mathematics were actually designed for the temple architecture and for the yagyas and for all of that. That was the mathematics and the temples were linked together.
Yes, I in fact saw that a lot of connections between astronomy and between architecture were there, and of course mathematics. So, like I saw in the Katyayana Sulba Sutras, they mention about a method for finding the east-west line and north-south line directions, and then this they used in architecture and making the temples. And then a book called Manasara on architecture, which I became aware of, and then I got really fascinated by it. I mean, I focused mostly on mathematics, but I find this also a very fascinating topic. That how come, like, what is so special about this architecture? Right now, you were talking about these yantras and the connection between the architecture and yantras. I've always wondered if I, for example, visit a church or a cathedral in the West, and it's also very good architecture, very beautiful architecture, and very good shapes and everything. But the feeling is totally different when you visit an Indian temple, and somehow it somehow touches you so much inside, and like this sense of timelessness, which Sankrant was mentioning. But you suddenly feel like you're in a space where time has stopped, and as if 1,000 years can just go by, within a fraction of a second.
So you have a question then for Anuradha ji, and
yes, in fact, yes, I have a question that like two questions actually, if I may. One is that what makes you think this architecture evokes this kind of feelings, and my second question is like personal. Like, did you ever have such sort of experiences yourself in temples when you were some deep meditative spiritual experiences when you were in some temples?
For that, I'll let you read. For the second part, I'll let you read the book, because I have mentioned those key turning points in my life when all of them were at 3 different temples in 3 different parts of the country. So for that, you'll have to read the book. For the first one, can you repeat the question? I want to answer it.
Yeah, the first one was that, like even Western cathedrals, churches, they have very nice architecture, Gothic architecture and everything. But the feeling is totally different when you visit Indian temples. Also, like with statues, the smurtis, like the Greek statues are very realistic, but the Indian murtis are very different. They obviously they're not literally real, but they have a very deep connection with the soul when you look at them. And this is, I was wondering, what makes it like that?
Yeah, so I would divide it into 2 parts. One is that we relate to Indian temples because we understand those stories and we understand those metaphors to whatever extent we do. All of us understand to a different extent, but we do understand. So when we look at, even if we look at one panel of Ramayana, we know the whole story and we know what it is trying to tell us. So I'm sure Greeks, if they know their stories and if they're still connected to their mythology, they will relate to them far more than they would relate to ours, because that's their lineage, this is our lineage. So I assume they will connect to it as much as we connect to our temples. That's my assumption. Second, the reason we feel so much is that, again, the engineering part of, or the architectural design, one, it has evolved over a period of time, and anything that gradually, organically evolves eventually reaches a certain level of excellence. And most evolved temples are, in my opinion, are the 10th, 11th century temples. They are the most exquisite, most well developed, and the most beautiful temples across the country, right from Kashmir to Kanyakumari. The most beautiful temples. If I could time travel, I would go back to that time when the first invasions were yet to happen, and India had the most beautiful architecture, even in the smallest of villages. But I think the beauty of our architecture, to the level it evolved, is that it blended the different subjects as we see them today, be it aesthetic, be it storytelling, be it the way energy is controlled and channelized. So when you move inside the temple, you going from from a normal atmosphere outside the temple, and the way energy keeps getting concentrated till the time you reach Garbhagriha, that engineering aspect, I don't know if many people have explored. or mastery.
This is great point actually. Some days back, I was speaking with a person. He was also mentioning that certain spaces have this. He was actually from also a meditator. The person I was speaking with, he was speaking certain shapes have this ability to concentrate energy and focus on. So something like that. I think it is more.
And also, they were not built randomly. Most of the ancient temples were not built randomly. They were the place where they were built and the time at which they were built were chosen very, very specifically. Astronomy or astrology was a very, very integral part of every temple. Depending on who the deity is, depending on what the purpose of the temple is, they were absolutely aligned to the celestial systems, and they were replicating them actually. So they were replicating the. So I think most of our temples, which are built as per Shastric traditions, are replicating the Yatha Brahmande Tatha Pinde, Tatha Brahmande, that thing, that it's replicating everything. So they were trying to kind of map so that you can map it to your own body and the universe inside you. So, like I said, that science, art, tools, technology, that probably is our biggest loss.
So thank you, Bhaskar, for joining us. And I'm going to put this up one more time. There's a quote from Sri Bibek Dabaroy about the book: "To appreciate and document this, a person has to travel beyond the dotted line to where history and geography seamlessly weave together in this land of ours." And this is really what Anuradha ji has done, really taken on this incredible journey. I find this book is, I'd almost call it like a travelogue, but it's not a travelogue at all. It's a travelogue into the inner world of what is happening, below the surface of what is happening, and how all these stories and are kind of linking this land together. So this is again a little view of the cover. Lotus in the Stone is the title of the book. You can order it at Garuda Prakashan, grpr.in/LITS, grpr.in/LITS. It is lit, it lits up. So this is what is. And Anuradha ji, thank you for coming on the show. It's absolutely fascinating book. There's, I end up, as a publisher, you end up having so many books come through, but some books are really like, they touch the heart and they teach you something, and they take you on this real journey where you're transformed at the end of it. You're not the same person that started when you started reading the book. And I found that Lotus in the Stone was one of those. So tell us now, finally, to end, what is this Lotus in the Stone?
So I started exploring ruins, which became temples for me. And then what appeared to be stone actually turned out to be a beautiful 1,000-petaled lotus, and I'm still opening the petals. So this is some of the petals opened, and hopefully I'll open some more as we go along. But what I want people who read the book is to hopefully start reconnecting with India, that is ours, as our own. Let's start owning up this India. Let's start considering it as our very own, and you can do it very easily if you travel.
Thank you so much. Namaste and happy Navratri to everybody as well. Namaskar.
Namaskar.